Good morning. Welcome to the Green Fest event, November 2020. And I'm very honored to welcome both Carlo Ratti and Carlos Moedas. Thanks very much for joining us. Thanks very much for being part of this event. And we will have, I will do a soft moderation because the floor is from our guests, is for our guests. And I will ask Carlos, because we will have a very informal conversation and trying to be fluent conversation, no big formal rules, and knowing that both Carlos and Carlo know each other for a long time, I would like to ask Carlos Moedas to introduce Carlo to the audience.
Thank you very much, Pedro. It's really a great pleasure to be here, first with you, and congratulations for the Green Fest. It's always a big success. But today it happened something magic, which is that we have Carlo Ratti with us. I met Carlo Ratti, we were very, very young. We were actually doing probably the most transformative project of Europe. I was doing Erasmus, and Carlo was in Paris. And he introduced me at the time to the real pasta at his little room, and we became very good friends. Carlo, after that, I mean, he's an engineer that became an architect, that is really an amazing guy in the field of cities, and one of the best speakers and great persons that I've met in my life. And what happened is that when I went to Brussels, and I became a commissioner, at the beginning I was struggling about this idea that we have so much technology, so much of science and knowledge, and then there was something failing, that the productivity was not there, that the digital world was not working. And suddenly I thought about Carlo, because I think that probably is one of the major specialists in this merge in between the physical and the digital world. And so I asked Carlo to become a European Union advisor, and he became my special advisor for the time I was in Brussels, to help us understand what's going on, why the digital and the physical world are not getting together as they should. What are we doing wrong? And really, I think that Carlo was able to passionate a lot of people in the European Union by the way he tells the story, by the things he does. And the other day, I sent him a little picture then when I went to the MIT, to his great lab called the MIT Senseable City Lab in 2015. To see it happening, and it was a really magical moment. And so we've been also working since then, but we really go a long way. So Carlo, welcome to Lisbon. Welcome to this great place that is the Gulbenkian Foundation. And I think Carlo will tell us also a little bit about his own experience with Gulbenkian. Like, he has a little story when he was a little kid about Gulbenkian. And I think that Mr. Gulbenkian would be very proud to have us here, because he was a visionary. And so he would be very happy to know that the Gulbenkian Foundation, as you know, has decided to disinvest in fossil fuels. So we've sold the last company we have in the fossil fuel industry. And we have asked our managers not to invest in fossil fuels directly. So it's also a major moment for us in the foundation. But Carlo, tell us a little bit about you, about your why do you know Gulbenkian, and then about a little bit how you help me on this physical-digital merge of the world that is happening.
Thank you, and a really great pleasure to be here. As you said before, to organize this would have taken a a lot of time, but it's a kind of serendipity, like, I was flying back to Europe, and it became like a magic moment to meet up again. And it has been really a great pleasure over the years since the initial pasta to continue working on innovation at different levels, not only in cooking, but also thinking about innovation in cities, in the built environment, especially in all those dimensions that today are very crucial. Think about 4 numbers about cities. Remember those 4 numbers, 2, 50, 75, and 80. Cities are only 2% of the surface of the planet, but they're actually 50%, a bit over 50% of the population. There are 75% of energy consumption, 80% of CO2 emissions. So if we can do something to make our cities a little bit more sustainable, that can be a big deal globally. And so working on this, looking at how new technologies can help us to better understand the cities through data, looking at the data in order to design cities in a different way. All of these things, the things we've been discussing in Brussels, but also elsewhere, I think they're core of what GreenFest is today. Now, going back to Gulbenkian, it's a little anecdote. I'm very happy to be here. It's my second time at the foundation. But when I was a little kid, I remember my mom told me the story of this amazing collector from Lisbon, and also his legacy and how that had become a big aggregation center here in the city. And so I remember, I think I was 5 or 6 years old. I remember how I thought that was kind of an inspiration of what you can do in life and what you can leave behind later.
Absolutely. And Pedro, so when we started basically in the European Commission working with Carlo, I think that somehow Carlo was a little bit ahead of his time, and as a visionary, he's a little bit ahead of the time. And there was 2 things. One, that he did an amazing work that I think that he should share with us about the work he did in mobility in the city of New York, looking exactly at the Uberization of the economy and the sharing of traveling in a city, and how can you reduce the number of cars. I think that's something that we really would like to hear about from Carlo, because I think it's so changing. This morning I was basically showing in a conference the image of New York in the 1900s just with horses, 10 years later just with cars, and I think that would be interesting to have the vision of Carlo, how he will see cities in 2030, because Japan came basically a couple of days ago with South Korea saying we want to be carbon neutral in 2050, China in 2060, and of course Europe leading the way with a carbon neutral by 2050, as Ursula von der Leyen said. So if you look at the transformation in the 1900s, and the idea that basically I think it's 1902, there was a conference in New York where people were trying to plan the future, and they said, this is a disaster. I mean, there's horses everywhere, it's smelly, it's horrible, this is unsustainable. And nobody knew how to change the world, and 10 years later, the world has changed, and the cars were there, the horses were not there anymore. So it would be interesting for GreenFest to think, what is going to be 2030? Probably something that we don't even imagine, or do we? I don't know if you guys want to share.
Sure. I mean, I think let's. Well, first of all, one little thing about what you mentioned about vision and being a visionary, especially in Brussels. I think there's a thin line between visions and hallucinations. And I remember that some of the times when we were going to some of the offices at the Berlaymont office building, I think some of the people were looking at us more like we had hallucinations more than visions. So I'm not sure that that thin line is sometimes resonates very well with a giant administration like the European Union. But still, I wanted to get back to the point. The first point you mentioned was about the project with taxis, because that's a little anecdote. It's actually a bit of data, a bit of big data that was made accessible for research by Mike Bloomberg. I remember Mike Bloomberg, when he was mayor of New York, in his office he had a little sign, and the sign went, "In God we trust, everybody else bring data." And so what he did as mayor was actually take a lot of data sets and made them accessible to people. In particular, Rit, his commissioner for transportation, took a lot of data from the taxi network in New York and again, made it accessible. And we started analyzing the data, and one of the first questions we asked was, well, how many taxi trips can you share in New York? And this was before Uber launched Uber Pool, so this was before the time, and that was based on the fact something that we all have experienced, I think, sometimes in New York, in many other cities. We are going to the airport, somebody next to us at the hotel is also going to the same airport. We could have shared a taxi, but we didn't know we could share it. So we tried to quantify mathematically how many trips we can share. And well, it turns out that, we can share a lot that without creating any delays to people. So with, can take everybody to destination when they need to be there with a small delta, 1, 2, or 3 minute delay, but something negligible, with 40% less cars than what we have today. And actually from that project was picked by Uber. We then started a big collaboration between MIT and Uber, and as you know today, Uber Pool does exactly that. Uber Pool and similar systems like, by Via, by Didi, by Lyft, and so on. So they allow 2 trips to be merged. And if you merge 2 trips, all other things being equal, it's important to say, but if you merge 2 trips, you remove 1 car from the road, which means less energy consumption, less congestion, less pollution in our cities. So that was like a little story of how we can take data to understand the city. We can analyze the data with different types of intelligence, in this case, more with analytics. You can use artificial intelligence, and then from that analysis, then you can go back to the city and try to transform it. So that was really an idea of what we can do more and more in this emerging space of smart or sensible cities, and how this can help us ultimately create more livable and lovable cities.
Very good, very good. And you have some data from Lisbon, right? Or at least you have analyzed data. At some point you sent me. Actually,
there's a beautiful, and I'll say this, you will probably edit this out, but we can then take some of the videos and put them here. Actually, to say, we also have a beautiful visualization on Lisbon that was actually done by Pedro Cruz. Pedro is now a professor at Northeastern University, but he was for a while a researcher in our lab at MIT. And Pedro did a beautiful visualization of taxis in Lisbon. Again, for the first time, we can look at the city like a living organism. We couldn't a few decades ago, but today we can. And that ability to see the world of the artificial, our homes, our buildings, our objects, like living things, is radically changing the way we can approach design.
Absolutely. Well, now we are living in this November 2020, and the world is upside down. I mean, the Western world, now it's upside down. Of course, we all hope, and hopefully we will see a positive outcome and a positive future. Let me step back a little bit, because I know, Carlo, that you were the curator of the big biannual event in China in December 2019. So last December, let's say the pre pandemia, and you were the curator of this very interesting project called the Eyes of the City, and you were quite provocative when you ask the open question, how if the cities have eyes, let's say, to watch us. Isn't that also here the threat of the big brother or the big mother watching us? So how do you see that?
You're absolutely right. When you look at the cities, somehow, on the one hand, we can actually look at the cities we were saying like living organisms. It's kind of a convergence between the evolution of the natural world and the evolution of the artificial world. We can use this as a very positive force in order to make our cities more sustainable, in order to kind of fix some of the inherent problems of the Anthropocene. So certainly, this convergence of digital and physical has a lot of upside. But also, we cannot forget some of the risks. And that's what we wanted to do in China. Why in China? Well, in China, as you know, facial recognition is everywhere. You just enter the country, you got facial recognition. It's, it's radically changing our relationship with public space. Public space used to be the space of anonymity. Now, with facial recognition, public space is becoming the space of control, the space of recognition. And so we took that as a topic. By the way, that was became very interesting. It also happened while there was a lot of turmoil in Hong Kong. So at that time, having a conversation about facial recognition became the right thing to do. In order really to see how these technologies, yes, can help us make our cities more livable and lovable, as we were saying before, but also there's issues, and control is certainly one of the things we need to address very seriously. And that point is about, is not only about the city, it's also much closer to us. If you look at our pockets with our phones, our phones are collecting so much data about our lives and how to use it well. I think this is a place where your commission, Carlos, has been pioneering new regulation, with GDPR and all of that, is probably, what now is being copied by many other countries or regions like California. California privacy legislation is inspired by GDPR. So somehow, I think this is certainly a place where Europe can lead and should lead in the future.
And Carlos, if I may, you were really one of the champions. So you were championing the research and development, innovation, when you were the head of Europe. And during those 5 years, you pushed really very, very hard that topic. And recently, with this expectation of the new Green Deal, digital deal, I noticed that you were somehow concerned that Europe will not invest as it should in the innovation. So how do you see the current moment?
No, I think that is still, I think that Europe has an amazing opportunity now, an opportunity to become the pole of attraction of talent. A little bit the United States after the Second World War, because after the Second World War, basically most of the scientists that were refugees from Europe went to the US. And the US became central to research, to innovation, to science, which the US was not before. And Europe now has this ability of being a platform where you'll have the US, we'll call it a small state, but a controlling state. That's actually what's happening today in the US. Let's see what will happen in the elections that are taking place. But then you have China, which is
Carlos, just one thing.
Is it?
You say
Yes.
what will happen in the election, but I think you will be broadcast after the election.
No. When is it going to be broadcast? So it's okay?
Don't worry, because
no,
at the
I
end we don't want to really to
No, but I think some people might
imagine,
feel...
Imagine that Biden was elected.
Exactly. So I think, what I've seen is that people...
I said a lot of the world is upside down.
So what I want to say is that he might look like a Trump supporter. A Trump supporter say, "Oh my God, what will happen in the elections?" And Biden was elected, and say, he was supporting Trump.
You're right.
Anyway,
let me rephrase it in a different way.
I think you should start again.
I'll start again. Let me get back to what I'm lost. So I think that Europe can really become a platform of attraction of talent because we are probably today the best place to be, where we have a model that will be more about empowering citizens than basically state control, which we see in a lot of other parts of the world with the turmoil that you were describing. So if we have the right really view on the legislation, which we have in terms of the GDPR, and we were, as Carlo was saying, really we were pioneers in regulating data in a way that data is part of your dignity as a person, that you can basically get your data from one place to another, that you can basically ask the system to forget you or your data if you want to. So data is part of the human dignity. So if we use our soft power in one side of regulation, which is very strong in Europe, especially on this area, and if we invest in science, then we can be that platform. What you were saying is that I was a bit astonished that looking at all this money that Europe is investing, so you're talking about 1.8 trillion, that very little went to science. Compared, so when I left, we put a proposal of a 100 billion euro program for Horizon Europe, and suddenly the proposal on the table is less than 100 billion. So I'm worried about it because I think that getting out of this pandemic, there's just one way out of the crisis, which is science. And when you look at the United States, you see something that is puzzling. You know, Horizon Europe, with the budget that we have, and even with the 90 billion or even 100 billion, if you divide that by 7 years, because it's a 7-year budget, you're talking about something like 11 billion per year, 12 billion per year. In the United States, whatever is the administration, the National Institute of Health last year had a budget of 41 billion euros. So just one institute in the United States of America has a budget that is basically 4 times the European, let's call it federal, because this is the budget at the center, the European one, 4 times bigger. And so I think that if the European politicians do not understand the opportunity, the need for investing more in science at these crossroads that we're living, then I'm very upset and I'm disappointed and all that, but I will keep fighting for it because that's what I do, and that's kind of like the activism of my life, is to fight for more money in science and innovation. But let me tell you, I think that we were able at least to design this program of the European Union and approve the program, not the money, not the amount, before I left. And we were able to design something that will be very important for Europe, which was exactly to create and to give freedom to scientists and innovators, which was exactly the model that the United States had in the 1950s. Was basically, and I mean, you would remember that, I mean, Einstein and a lot of them went to the US, where? They went to the US, to the Institute of Advanced Studies, and the University of Princeton, because the only thing that Princeton would ask them would be, come and do science. No questions asked. You have the money, do science. And I think that was so ahead of the time in the US that if now we apply the same model, which we are applying at the science side with the European Research Council, if we have now this new European Innovation Council, and we can give the freedom to the innovator and focus less on the innovation, but more on the innovator, then I think that Europe can really, really enjoy and really get this opportunity for the future of the world and be this platform. In the last 2 years, I received so many calls from people in the UK, which is an amazing country, but people are asking questions about coming to continental Europe, people in the US and other parts of the world, because they feel that in Europe that freedom exists, that we still believe in the intuition of scientists, that we believe on what they do. So I think that if we do that, we will have more people like Carlo basically coming to Europe, and that's good for Europe. So that's a little bit what I imagine the plan for Europe.
Talking about innovation, I know that Carlo is involved in so many different projects where innovation is really there, and we talk about. I would like you to elaborate a little bit more on the Dubai 2020 that you are leading the Italian pavilion in Dubai. and what's the concept behind it, because it seems that you really are stressing the point of the sustainability and the circularity of the materials involved and
Yeah, totally. Well, first of all, maybe just to clarify also, because I kind of have different hats. So one hat is what you mentioned before, is that professor at MIT will run Senseable City Lab. So there we do research. And then I got another hat where we do design. We take the same ideas, we say that we do design and innovation. So we take the same principles and try to bring them to the design of a building, of a city. In this case, what you're mentioning is the Italian pavilion at the World Expo in Dubai. And then the third thing actually is something we've been developing in recent years, which is some of the ideas developed at the lab or in the office have become startups. And so now we have 3 companies in the United States, 3 companies in Europe. Some of them have been growing quite a lot, dealing with different spaces. But those are 3 different ways to look at the same space, this new space of digital and physical in the built environment, and explore it through research with the lab, projects with the office, and products or new initiatives with the startups. And so going back to your point, yes, the Italian pavilion in Dubai is going to be an experiment in circularity. So it's going to be this, at the World Expo, you always have national pavilions. We actually been involved with several expos. Back in 2008 with the expo in Zaragoza, Spain, in 2015 with the expo in Milan. The expo is a good place because you kind of need to build like a small city very quickly. And so you can take more risk. If you build something that has to last for a long time, you need to plan ahead and you're much more conservative. But the expo is like, a bit like a Burning Man. So we actually need to build an environment and test things, that will be working for 6 months and then is going to be converted into something else. So it's a good place to push the boundary, but also is a good place to push for circularity, because usually what happens at the expo is that you build these kind of giant pavilions, and then at the end everything is demolished, or a lot of things are demolished. So in this case, in the Italian pavilion in Dubai, what we try to do is think about a pavilion that has circularity at its core. And that means both working with new materials. We're working with mycelium, the root of mushroom, which is a beautiful material that you can grow and compost afterwards. But also the very idea of the pavilion is like a living pavilion. So the pavilion is made of 3 boats. These boats will arrive in Dubai by sea, and then those boats become the roof of the pavilion. So it becomes an exhibition space during the expo. And following the expo, they will keep on sailing. So it's like a sailing pavilion that stops during the expo in Dubai, and then will continue.
Strong message.
Yeah, the message is that we need to reuse and be as circular as possible, which means being circular means, yes, having stuff that you can recycle, stuff that you can compost, but even better, having a pavilion itself that can continue living. Now, I need to tell you, however, something, this was our idea, we won the competition, we've been very excited, and then I think the project is a bit a victim of its own success, because now people in the Emirates liked it so much that they want to keep it as a permanent pavilion. So, we want to do the whole thing like on this pavilion, then keeps on sailing, and now they're telling us, we like it so much, we want to keep it here. And so that kind of sometimes happens. So we'll see what will be after the end of Expo, but somehow I think that approach is something that should be in every project that's done today. I think, in what you're doing here at the Gulbenkian Foundation, in every project, that should be at the core, sustainability in general, and in particular circularity.
Because without circularity, you don't have sustainability. It's very interesting because we were telling this story, and I was thinking about a good friend who is the chairman of Merck, and the logistics, and they have all these boats, and he was telling me about the fact that now, for each of one of these big ships, they basically mark each piece of the ship so they can recycle everything, which is something that is so new in an industry that was so polluting.
Nature does it every day, and does it for trillion years.
Exactly.
So it's a living lab.
Nature is such a better designer than we are. If you look at a tree behind us, if you look at the tree, it's amazing. It starts from a piece of code of information, the seed, and then you get all of the energy you need locally, you get all the nutrients you need locally, you create an amazing piece of architecture and design, which is that trees are much better than what any of us can do. And then at the end, when life is over, all of that goes back to the ingredient, to the main ingredients, or that goes back to compost. So I think we should really think about the future, dream about the future when we'll be able to grow a building like that tree grows. And then that will be, that will really. This should be actually our inspiration as designer. And nature is, of course, nature had 100,000 of years of evolution, so has an advantage, but we need to catch up as fast as possible to be able to create an environment like that.
But we shouldn't turn our back to the nature, because you just said, and I know that in your work you are also very much inspired on nature, and when you said also the convergence with the technology, with the digital world, how do you see also different areas of knowledge, disciplines cooperating and looking into nature like the biomimicry does in order to inspire, let's say, us to...
Yeah, no, you're totally right. If you look at the past, one of the tragedies of the Anthropocene has been this kind of fracture between the natural and the artificial world. And if you look at, for instance, at the 18th century in France, this idea of what French people call aménagement du territoire, which is something that's impossible to translate in English, but basically is about controlling nature and managing nature and making sure that the artificial, takes over and takes control. Well, I think that approach is what has brought us through the crisis we're living, the crisis that we're living under many dimensions, first and foremost, the climate dimension. And so I think, how do we get out of this? In a similar way to what you were saying before about New York City in the early 20th century, and how the problems were solved by a new approach, not by fixing the old world, but actually by bringing a revolution. And I think in a similar way, I think that we need to look at this integration of the natural and artificial. So that is really what we should try to do. And digital is helping a lot, because digital is kind of breathing life into the artificial. Digital means that through sensors and intelligence, we can turn a building such as this one into something much more intelligent that is a bit more similar to that tree, that gets information, responds to that information, and tries to use this intelligence to save energy, to be more efficient, to help people better. So digital is one way to do it, and the other way is also clearly to learn, as you're saying, from nature itself, biomimicry, or use different materials. So there's many ways to explore this, but ultimately is how we can converge better between the natural and the artificial world.
But it's not that, that's really beautiful what you just said in terms of thinking on the digital in that way. But at the same time, we kind of, and I talk as someone that was a politician, you kind of try to put digital on the top of the physical without thinking too much. Or like businessmen that they say, let's invest in IT, and they just put IT on the top of a structure. That doesn't work. I remember like a very anecdotal example. In the commission, I would receive my letters through a PDF, but then the letters would have to go from like around 20 people that would have to sign off that letter for the letter to come to me. Like in the old world, so nothing changed. It was just like the digital was put on top of the physical. And I was curious about, how do you see that, Carlo? How do you see how we have to change the physical for the digital, and I think we're not really doing that in a lot of industries.
Well, I like the example you gave, but I remember something. It's only information I got from the Economist, the Economist magazine. But I remember that they looked at actually consumption of paper, and if you look at the beginning with email, actually for a little bit, even consumption of paper went up a little bit, and then it started going down. And the beginning was the time when some of the CEOs who were not very conversant with technology would still get a lot of emails and ask their assistants to print the email and read the email. And I saw this beautiful thing of people who were actually putting a protocol number on every email received. That was like using 19th century ideas in the world of digital. But now, then everybody's doing just digital. So somehow, there's always a transition phase. There's some inefficiency, but ultimately, if you look at where we are now, it's getting much easier. And when you're looking at other ways to sign on letters like DocuSign, in some of the companies I mentioned before, all the board decisions that are done through DocuSign, that is going to save a lot of physical work. So somehow, that's an example of how, yes, you might have a phase transition, and there you might get some inefficiencies, but ultimately digital can, as in this example, make our world more sustainable.
It's true, but I don't know, Pedro, in your experience as a CEO, because most of the companies, they still see IT and digital as a separated part of the company, or something like, in that you see as not embedded in everything, but as just like on the side. Do you still see that today?
Historically, what I see is that we, in our culture, we tended to separate areas, and within a company, we had not only IT, but also HR and many other areas were like islands, like separate, not in a holistic way. And nowadays, what I still see as a challenge is that companies tend not to integrate the three pillars of sustainability, not only the economical side, financial side of it, but also the social impact and the impact on the environment. So I think it's much more like a way of thinking that we used to have different disciplines separately.
Exactly.
And I think that the trend, it's more and more like the convergence, the natural and the digital world that converge. Here also I see more and more that things tend to converge. And,
it's true.
Yeah, no, but you're right. There's in the process we need to break down many silos. For instance, when you look at cities, a clear example of this is what's happening in cities with smart or sensible cities. And then when you look at that, Barcelona was one of the first cities ever to actually combine two key roles in the city. Exactly with this in mind, because otherwise you go silos that don't talk to each other. It was actually combining the position of the chief architect of Barcelona, and that was probably 7 or 8 years ago, with the CTO, the chief technology officer. And by combining that was really a way to break down two silos and put digital also at the core of physical planning of the city. So, and the same thing has to happen in many organizations. In the same way, again, at the beginning, probably when people were talking about green, they might have had a small department looking at sustainability issues. But like you're saying now, in the foundation at Gulbenkian, you decided to divest from all fossil fuels. So it has become core to every activity you're doing. So I think, it's this kind of breaking down silos. And actually, that's why I think it's important to have something like GreenFest, because by coming together, by sharing ideas, that becomes a very important lesson to really how we can put this at the core is something that's a glue behind all of what we do, not just as a side activity where we look at green or digital issues.
We talked about future 2050 decarbonization goals, and we have these, at least in my back mind and in our back minds, are these SDGs goals 2030. So 10 years, in the next 10 years, this short term. And with this current crisis, health and economical crisis, most of the goals, the sustainable development goals, somehow are more challenging and more difficult to get there on time. So, and you also, Carlos, as a trustee of a very prestigious foundation, how do you see also, how can we, let's say, engage the different stakeholders? How can we engage citizens? How can we listen to the citizens, engage them into this and fighting the fight that we need really to speed up? Because in parallel we have this climate change and other issues that we are really facing?
I think there's one main issue with the Sustainable Development Goals, is that they are too macro. They are really far away from people, because if I say that if you go on the street, people don't really know. And they know they exist, but they don't know each one of the goals and what that encompasses in their lives. What do they have to change? And I think one of the things that governments should be doing would be to give more granularity to those sustainable development goals, so people understand how they can contribute to those goals. And I think that in Europe, we tried to do that by creating these missions of science, where we would have a vision that would be top-down and bottom-up, like giving to the countries the missions that they have to accomplish so they can contribute for the goals, the Sustainable Development Goals. And without that, it's very difficult to engage everyone on goals that for them, they feel so small to achieve the goal that they don't get there. So I think that one of the ideas that countries should be looking at would be to have these very concrete missions that will contribute to the goals. And if you do that, you engage people. So I think that that would be, for me, my first point is to really engage people through concrete actions. And I still see very little of that in most of the cities. I mean, some cities, and you have very good examples in Portugal, like Braga and other places that you know, where people are working on concrete actions. But in general, I think that the message is not yet there. And you have places like Greenfest where you discuss, but then people are not discussing it yet in the street on the day-to-day. So I think that's extremely important. Second, I think that the goals are always inspirational. And so we have to feel inspired by the goals, but we know that the goals are an ongoing objective. So we cannot put pressure on ourselves saying that by 2030 we have to achieve exactly the goal, because that will happen exactly what happened with the European vision for 2020. Everybody would invest 3% of their budget in science, and that's not true. It didn't happen.
Goals for the millennium.
Exactly, it goes for absolutely. So we have to push and pull people. We have to really push through the dream and then pull them by the concrete actions and have this movement that I think will be led by cities, not by countries somehow. And that's what we see around the world. The cities are the ones that are the engine for this to happen, and not the countries, which is creating a problem that the countries feel that they don't have enough power. And so you are basically also creating a problem, which is there's a gap, a vacuum in politics in between the local level and the supranational level of Europe or multilateral organizations. And the countries, they feel they're losing the power, and so they fight back through extremists and populists, which is something that we'll have to deal with in the future. But yes, I would go for these two actions of creating. This work that I'm talking about, just to give the credit to the person, was done with Mariana Mazzucato, which is a very well-known, also Italian/American. In that case, Carlo is just Italian. I think she's both. And she was basically the one that helped us build this idea of the missions in Europe that we did very well. And I think that Ursula von der Leyen, when she talks about finding a way that people don't die from cancer, she's putting a very concrete mission in the heads of researchers to be able to do that in the next 10 years, or the electric plane, or other missions that will come from the European Commission.
Yeah, I like this idea of translating the SDGs. I see a lot of companies are trying to translate it, because somehow the SDGs have to be very abstract. In the translation, I see it happening a lot in the private space, companies and so on, banks, in the way, how they can change their behavior. You're right, it's more difficult for citizens, and I think that's where local politics should help a lot. But going back to your point at the beginning about, this in the present crisis, I think the present crisis is quite good from that point of view, because we are rethinking so many things, how we travel. I mean, for instance, I don't think that some of the crazy things that we were doing before, like flying from New York to Hong Kong for a 2-hour meeting and flying back, we were forced to do it because, they would say, if you don't come, the project will not happen. I think this has been somehow, with all the tragedy of what has happened over the past year, I think, if this had happened 10 years ago, it would have been a disaster. 10 years ago, we didn't have Zoom and Teams. We had poor connectivity. The iPhone was just born 10 or 15 years. Without the iPhone, without all that. Somehow, because it happened now, it's becoming an accelerator. And I think it is sending us to a new world. And in this new world, I think some of the very unsustainable patterns, for instance, related to travel, more flexibility in our lives, this kind of flexibility, I think, is going to stay with us, and hopefully, to help us get closer to the SDGs. So going back, to what Churchill said, I would say, never let a good crisis go to waste. I think this crisis can help us to actually get closer to the SDGs.
Yeah. And waste is not waste until we waste it. So back to the reutilization. And just some final, let's say, questions. You talk about rethinking, and we need to rethink a lot. So we are all familiar with the design thinking methodologies, but now you are talking about rethinking design, and rethinking design in many different aspects, many different angles, namely the ones that you mentioned on the cities. And according to one of your books, so very interesting concepts, like one book about the open source, and if you can elaborate a little bit more on it, and the other one on the future or the of the cities, and you talk about sensors, networks, hackers, and this urban life. And one more comment, one more remark related with the question is that you also mentioned, back to the nature, that dinosaurs are not yet extinct, and at least you identified 2 dinosaurs. One are the hospitals, and the other one are the universities. Can you elaborate a little bit more on those two?
You put many things here. Maybe one first thing, the more general concept, is about, there's a very good definition of design I like. It's a definition by Herbert Simon won the Nobel Prize in economics in the past century, was a great researcher, mathematician, economist. He says, the natural sciences look at how the world is, but design looks at how the world could be. So if you actually combine Carlo's idea how we can put more money into science and research with something which is more like a design approach, about looking at how we can transform our cities or our planet. I mean, to me, that's really the winning, the winning mix. And to be honest, I have no clue of what the Commission has in mind today when they're talking about a new Bauhaus. But certainly, if they have this in mind, to look at how we can use science with a design mindset, with the idea of not only describing how the world is, but like design, looking at how the world could be, I think there we might have a winning recipe. And that's some of the things we're mentioning in the books, in the books you mentioned, about the city of tomorrow, or about architecture that's much more like code that we can manage in open source. But going back to the last thing you mentioned, the dinosaurs. Well, we've seen digital change entire industries. Think about how digital changed media. Media over the past 20 years have been totally disrupted by digital. However, universities are still behaving more or less like they did in the year 1000. In the year 1000, when Bologna is the first university, becomes the model for the modern university, and has been the model for the past 1,000 years, and universities haven't changed much. Also because many universities are kind of monopolies, and they build on their name. A university is also, I believe, a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you got a place which is considered number one, then of course the students, researchers, professors will want to be there, so we'll keep on being number one. So somehow I think university has not been disrupted yet, but I think what we are seeing now, especially this year with COVID, is the emergence of a new model. It's not a digital university, that's certainly not enough. We tried it over the past few years. The MOOCs, MOOCs are just a fraction of what a university is. But it's again something that combines digital and physical. And I think it holds a lot of promise. And over the next few years, we'll see a lot of these new hybrid models emerge. They're already emerging right now. And I think that's going to be exciting. So that applies to universities. And you mentioned also hospitals, because again, today you can do so many things in a distributed way. So yes, you will still need an operation, a place to go and have an operation in a building, but a lot of diagnostics, a lot of things. For instance, all the doctors over the past 9 months in the United States were actually visiting patients via Zoom, and I think some of that will continue. So you can do some things via Zoom. You can do some diagnostics throughout the city. You can have small places. You need to bring everybody to a giant building, and then yes, you will still have, again, a place where you need to go for an operation. So somehow, again, is this combination of digital and physical that can help us rethink the model of the university or of the hospital.
But it is interesting because, as you said, in the universities, and we saw that in education and health, the pandemic accelerated, but again, accelerated in a way that, for instance, if you're at home with your kids, you see that. So teachers or professors at university, they think that basically being in a room with kids teaching is the same as just putting the camera and doing the same looking at the camera. So they don't change, or they are about to change. I think they will change that. So the first moment was at least that now they accept the camera, as doctors now accept the camera to do the teleconsultation. But the second moment will be about thinking, no, but if I have the camera, the way I will do it is totally different from the way that I used to do it, because the interaction with the camera has to be quicker. I cannot stay for 2 hours talking to a room because nobody will listen. So the whole structure of the course has to change. And then the professor or the teacher will have to have more time for individual interaction to help students to solve problems, for instance. And so it's like we had this acceleration, and now the acceleration, I hope, in a second phase, will give room for a transformation. And without that transformation, we'll not be able really to get it right.
It's the same of you're saying that the commission was printing your PDFs and emails on paper, and then after a while they realize, oh my God, I don't need to do the same. So I think we'll go through the same phase. It's every new innovation requires a bit of time for adjustments to happen more from the way we respond.
And as you said, 5 years or 10 years ago, people will not even want to try. They would resist. The resistance was enormous in most of the sectors. For 5 years that I was in the commission, it was really difficult to put people just to do the basics, just to accept the digital. Now they accept, but they will have to go through this time of transformation. And that, I think, is essential for the next step, which is when the productivity will kick in. Because if you don't change that, then you do the following, is that what you're saying about the emails. If you print the email and you look at the email, it doesn't change anything on your productivity. It can even be negative in the first moment, and then you will kick in the second phase. So I think that's why I'm a really optimist, a little bit against the tide of the next 10 years, because the pandemic was able to push us to accelerate, and now we will go to the second phase in the next 10 years. So I think it will be a pretty interesting time to be alive.
That epiphany is the way how we, human nature, we change more our behavior. Is through epiphany more than sometimes the rational thing. If I may ask one of the last questions, or the last question before you close, is more a philosophical question. Is we live in this world where everything is smart. We have smart grids, we have smart cities, we have a smart virus, and how can we have more smart citizens and happy citizens? The philosophical, how are we going to live, since more and more people are moving into the cities, and there is also this mega cities trend elsewhere, not in Europe, but elsewhere. So how can we, being smart, have smart citizens and happy citizens?
Carlos, you want to go first? Or?
It's a philosophical question.
Well, I think, if you want me, I would say very simple, just, let citizens make decisions. So instead of using new technologies to have governments decide what is good for citizens, I think just let citizens be the one to decide what type of city they want to live in, how they want to use the new technologies. And that's really
the feedback loop that you mentioned.
Is the feedback loop, but also starting from is where you start. And if you start, from by engaging people and letting them decide how they, to make the decision. Clearly you're happy, you know what makes you happy, and so you should be the one making those decisions. Too many times we think that, technologies or smart cities, sensible cities, everything should be decided top down by the national government, by the European government. Well, actually, I think what government should do is really more empower people to make decisions and decide what type of city they want. So somehow that's, I would say that's the beginning of a smart citizen.
And no recipe and no size fits all.
Yeah, no, and also, you're totally right, because also, the solutions that you might want to have in one place are different solutions in another place. And, some cities are focusing more on one dimension, another dimension, local condition, climatic condition. So that's why, when you actually delegate and allow citizens to be the one to make decisions, they will be, they know what they want, and they will also make that solution the right solution for that particular place.
No, I think that's the road to travel, is that people want to co-design the future with you, but you don't know how to do it. You don't know how to engage them. You don't know how to work with them. And so we are in this first phase where cities do these public consultations, where you ask people, do you want a roundabout or do you want a statue? And they say one or another. I think that the future is more what Carlo is saying, that people want to co-design with you. And for that, you have to give them space, room, and to work with them in a peer-to-peer. So the politician will be just one among equals that is basically being a chef d'orchestre, being someone that is basically directing the orchestra, but not someone that is writing the music. And so it's what we actually today feel as politicians, the ones that are active politicians, that you are a bit lost because you want to decide, but people want to not to basically to be told. They want to do it with you, and that's something that is easy to say, but it's difficult to do. And I think that we will learn that in the next 10, 20 years, but it will take time and a lot of turmoil of populism and extremism around that. But we will get the right answer. I'm an optimist.
Thanks a lot for your contribution, both of you. It was really an honor to welcome you here. And if I may finish with your metaphor of the tree, or when you mentioned the tree that is behind us, really, I was thinking that they are an extension of our lungs, and we are an extension of their lungs, because they are exhaling oxygen, we are inhaling oxygen, then we are exhaling CO2, and they are capturing CO2. So we need to live together with the trees. I'm not saying that you should become tree huggers, but I'm saying that we need really to value nature and not to turn back on nature, because we can learn a great deal from nature. And I think that what you come, both of you, sharing with us was very helpful and very interesting. Thanks very much. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very good.